So we're going to explore the subscription model for life and the way how we can understand this beyond our familiarity with it. So, we have subscription services for movies, software. This is usually our frame of reference. Then you do have, what the WEF offered about that you will own nothing and be happy. So we can say that the subscription model for life is predicated upon ultimately the way how that you've disavowed yourself of a responsibility of ownership, that you are the one that created the world. That is ultimately principle, and it's not really addressed in this way, but that allows parasitism and ultimately the way how you can be sold on rentism as a principle. And so because you're drawing obviously a return from the ownership of an asset in order to compensate for the lack of presencing the creative self. Now, if you frame it along these lines, then the economy is an external manifestation of the spirituality, as I always talk about. So you always have to look at it from the self that you're sold on, not to see what you outsource. Easiest way that we can view subscription as a principle is by asking the foundational question as to whether or not you own your own time. Now that is key, because and I always talk about that, do you have a choice on the way how time's given to you? Are you commanded to produce yourself as a credit instrument that you're given as? Now, when you think that through, if you are orientated towards life marginally, or the totalizing claim of a buyer's journey, then ultimately you have to acquit yourself of the truth claim that time is marginal, because you're orientated towards life through an interest that leads, as I always say. So that means to say that what you can do is that your agency is predicated on demand and not creativity. So through orientating through an interest or the marginality of your time, you're externalizing the creation of a world to legitimize that totalizing claim that you don't question, when you don't question the nature of your actions. And so in turn, that enables that question of do you own your own time it seems fucking bizarre. Once again, seems ridiculous to ask it, because we think, well, how can it not be my time? But if you're orientated in the manner that you set out, that you have to use credit that you do not originate, then you're on borrowed time. All right. So therefore, the time that you think is yours is not yours, because through the disavow, or through obviously through the goodwill that you extend, you allow credit to be sold back to you, and through it being sold back to you, allow leveraging over the credit instrument that you become, that you have to adhere to the command economy of your production. So this is principle when you're looking at subscription model, or just rentism, because it's the rentism of the constancy of the agency that you're credited. Now, it's never framed this way. Why? Because people don't ask these fucking fundamental questions about the way how they produce themselves as a credit instrument. It's just not even fucking to entertain when people are looking at, say, subscription model, or looking at the WEF, and you'll own nothing and be fucking happy. All right, so why? Because then they see this external manifestation of all the machinations of parasitism in our domain, and then project out that the issue is not a spiritual issue, but it's got to do with institutions and all this other shit, which is just, once again, you are chasing the cause and the symptoms. And so if time is the factor of our production, then, and we acquit ourselves of the transcendental truth claim that time is of value, then ultimately what we introduce, as I always keep on saying, is a usurping spirit. The usurping spirit is the one that needs to maintain the constancy of agency to legitimize itself, we could say. So what happens is that you're not animating what is without origination, or what we would equate with God. You're allowing your actions to be animated by what gives the pretense, or would like to think that it's God. Okay? And you don't have to entertain what kind of God are we talking about. You only have to think of the priests or the acolytes that obviously administer credit, all right, which is banking. Once again, if we're beholden to the way, if we spiritualize time, then we're beholden to a unavowed religiosity. So we are religious, but we don't know the nature of our faith. Okay, so the faith here is that, well, you like to think that you own your time, all right? but you don't. You're on borrowed time. So that time that you borrow against the future self is what is actually is what is orientated, or is what is weaponized, we could say, to maintain you as a credit instrument or as a site of expiation. So if you do play host to a usurping spirit, it's because it's expiating the very principle for life, which is without origination. And so any person that proclaims any form of spirituality or religiosity or whatever the case may be, if they allow their actions to be animated by money making, then they're obviously compensating for the lack of God within their lives. It's an absolute fucking lie that these people sell themselves on. And so the factor of your production is a credit instrument. All right, so that factor of that time, when time's given as a means utilized to produce a form of life, then ultimately, we have power. This is the problem, but through the way how we're sold not to see the power that we externalize. Okay, so you always have to look at this simultaneously, that we both empowered and we're disempowered. But the empowering obviously has a lot to do with the nature of the way how the world works and the way how rentism is structured. Because if we do not own our time in the sense of the goodwill that we extend and the way how credit is sold back to us, then ultimately we must pay rent, we could say, to maintain ourselves. So we pay for our own captivation. This is the most bizarre way of life that we've created for ourselves. And everybody's familiar with the understanding that the best prison is the one that people feel that they're free. Well, think of the way how that occurs within the West or modernity. You're sold a buyer's journey or niches. So the agency is obviously demand, and you can be orientated towards any kind of mainstream kind of way of life, or what is marketed as divergent or as aberrant, because they're all just lifestyles. And so if those lifestyles are all bound together, and they are, people like to think that the difference between, say, aberrant or alternative lifestyles is so different compared to a mainstream, but they're all just buyer's journeys, so they're all bound together. They're all based upon the way how that you clear time as an economic good each time you buy. All right, so this is the thing. So if people get sold on difference, it's the difference in the expression of the agency, but you're still credited demand. You're still allowed to choose within what is the sanctioned choice. That choice on the way how that you're to demonstrate or express your agency obviously is in reference to the principal choice that you don't, the fact that you don't have a choice on the way how time's given to you, and the way how you have to pay rent for that privilege, we could say. And so that is the source of the subscription model for life. So in turn, if you produce the agency that you're credited as the demand center as a consumer, that enables you to become a compliant tenant. All right, so the tenant is in reference to tenant, let's break it down. The tenant is in reference to the house or the form of life. So the form of life is what you don't fucking question, because obviously, nobody ever does. And so the tenant is in reference to the way how that you can demonstrate the agency that you're credited when you live in that house. The house, or as I say, the vehicle, the investment vehicle, is the consumer. So you long the consumer self to short the creative self. That's the way how you get sold on life. You're sold on your money making or on the marginality of your time, to disregard that through what you do, you produce the consumer that is always transcendent. But you're sold not to see that, because you're only orientated towards life as a compensatory exercise or a buyer's journey. And so through that whole setup, you outsource the significance of your actions. And so the core function of producing the agency is ultimately to not own your own time. So you're on borrowed time. The borrowed time is in reference to the restructuring of the credit instrument that you're given as, which I always talk about. The way how that these parasites are setting up a system of absolute control through maybe utilizing, say, distributed ledger technology or a unified ledger in reference to you're the credit instrument. If you understand that, well, you have to understand that you're an expiation site. You're the site of expiation. So we're sold, obviously, all the conveniences of our market orientation, and that access over ownership. So if you have access to resources, well, you don't need to own them. But if you don't own them, then you're allowed leveraging over your over your access, which is ultimately necessary in order to program you in reference to the credit that you use. And that's the way how that globalized kind of control kind of matrix or mesh network is set up. So it's selling people the understanding that, having access is just as good as ownership. But once again, that's in reference to goods and services. But you have to work that back to do you own your own time, or do you have a choice in the way how time's given to you? So if you can't connect the way how subscription model gets sold in reference to access to goods and services, and you can't connect it to the way how time's given to you, then you're going to always, like I said, you're going to be chasing the fucking cause and the symptoms, and you're not going to look at your existential status or the spirituality of your life or what animates your actions. And so this is where the nature of the Faustian pact, the existential arbitrage, is revealed. So if you make a pact with yourself, all right, so it's not an external mediating force of like the devil's advocate, like you play host to an animating principle for your life. It's not that basically that you're being possessed by a demon that is external to yourself. Is that you allow yourself to be your actions to be animated by a usurping spirit. That spirit you play host to, but you can play host to what we could say multiple spirits. But the spirit is not this thing that fucking comes and possesses you. All right, you're the one that allows yourself to be possessed. And so existential arbitrage is, as I always say, the risk-free proposition of arbitrage is that you buy and sell simultaneously in different markets. Obviously, existential arbitrage is completely different because it's not risk-free, but you externalize a risk. But you're sold on the buyer's journey as a risk-free proposition because risk is only in reference to the envisaging, which is ultimately just the way how you invest in the consumer vehicle in order to predicate your actions as money making, or what would be the level of affluence or the level of wealth commensurate to your aspirations. So you're sold you're sold on that risk-free proposition, but you won't connect obviously the totalizing risk to your marginal actions, because that's the way how you entrain your vision not to see that you're in a fucking death realm. All right, but that is principle in order to be orientated towards a way of life that can sell you convenience and in turn the access, and so therefore the rentism of the constancy of the agency that you produce when you practice existential arbitrage. And the existential arbitrage, if you're looking at it, it's predicated upon the absence of creativity. Absence of creativity is in reference to the world. So you don't own the world, all right, because you've outsourced that. That's an outsourcing operation for you. So what you've done is you've outsourced it to the managers in reference to the domain, we could say. So that means to say that if Earth was to be given holistically, your life was to be given to the planet or to your birth holistically, then you would animate what is without origination and take ownership of the fact that you do create the world. Right? This is the issue. So we do create the world. As the no ones of the world, we create the world, but we're sold not to see that we actually do that, because we get sold on the way how our actions become money-making, or the way how that we extend goodwill to a system that ultimately seeks our diminution. We constantly invest in the self, the marginal self that we presuppose that we have to be in order to be orientated towards life, and yet we never question the actual basis of that the trade or the Faustian pact is based upon the absence of creativity or the disavowed responsibility that you do create the world. Because if you did, then you would take ownership of your actions. If you did that, another person does that, then what you're doing is that you're creating the potential power of creativity to be animate a world beyond your own captivation. So to remove parasitism, spooks, technocrats, all the fucking mediators in the world, all right? You fucking the whole cast of them. They're just all there. They're all there for you. You do realize that they're all there for you. As soon as you turn away from them, then they're going to be they're going to completely and utterly, they're going to be like the woman in the fucking lake. She's just going to disappear. So you could say it's like in that way, it's like a lease agreement. So so the way how that you can frame the subscription model is that if you've gone from a tenant, you're going to a person that becomes sovereign. But sovereignty, how is sovereignty sold to you? Well, it's your demand. consumer sovereignty. Consumer sovereignty is in reference to the agency that you can demonstrate, and obviously not the claim that you acquit yourself of, or whether or not you have a choice on the way our time's given to you. So when you're looking at people talking about autonomy or sovereignty or the way how that you can be whole, if you do not fucking inextricably connect it to what animates your actions, then you will never own the world that you create. Okay, and if you own the world that you create, you're owning it in a way where you're going to be indivisibly given, and you cannot allow people to seek tolls or rents on the constancy of the agency, because they can only do that if you're orientated towards life marginally. If you're orientated towards marginally, then you're holding something in reserve. You ultimately feel that the life is a compensation. You need to seek a return for your actions. You cannot look at it from the aspect of that. If you take responsibility for the world that you create and you are a co-creator, you're obviously orientated towards the ownership of that world, but you're ultimately a custodian to it, all right, because you want to bequeath that to your descendants. And this is the difference between law, L-A-W, to law, L-O-R-E. All right, the law, it's literally, if we're talking about law here, you're talking about what is the story of creation that you are going to share, that you are going to, obviously your actions become the tell, and so therefore your action will speak louder than any words any of these fucking middlemen, parasites, mediators are going to be basically saying to you. And this is the way how that you take the subscription model back to what is without is a holistic, say, orientation that is without any form of rentism, of that constancy, because the agency changes. The agency is no longer economization. So economization in reference to your time. You can only economize time if it's given as marginal. You have to realize. So if your time is no longer no longer marginal, then your actions are becoming indivisible or becoming creative. You cannot toll actions that are creative when you are no longer acquitting yourself of that transcendental truth claim that time is a value or something that is marginal. You're indivisibly given to what you do. And if you have other people indivisibly given to what they do, they're all doing the same thing. You're not looking at the way how you clear time as an economic good, or create a bond of those totalizing claim of a buyer's journey, and that the way how that your actions are predicated upon a rivalrous dynamic. Because a rivalrous dynamic in that context, it really requires this smallness of vision in order to be orientated towards your subdivided Eden. If you're indivisibly given, then you have a much broader understanding of the significance of your actions and the vision that sustains your actions or the life. Now that would be with other people given in the same way, to create a world, a life, and obviously hand that down. And so be custodians of the law that you need to obviously be the adherent of. The law is not something that's asking you to acquit yourself of a transcendental truth claim. It's ultimately vivifying the spirit of what is without origination, and this relates to the way how the no ones become the lost, the ancestors that are lost.